Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's lecture. Today we are covering working parents. This is chapter 12 in your textbook. Okay, so the first thing we're going over is how many people, how many parents are working. And so we find that there's about 3/4 of mothers work full time, and that is for children under age 18. The number is slightly lower when you have children under the age of 6. There's a decent amount of women, a decent number of women who stay home for a few years and then go back to work after their child is a bit older and entering school age. One thing that President Obama did, gosh, I guess not even 6 to 8 years ago by now, was remove this requirement that you can't post anything on your resume that is more than 5 years old, because it was found to discriminate against women who were staying home with their kids. And so a woman might have plenty of experience in a job, but all of her credentials are more than 5 years old because she spent the first 5 or 6 years of her child's life staying with them. And so now, because of that, that rule about how long there has to be a gap between is gone. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, just an interesting little tidbit that popped in my head. Okay, so moms are the primary earners for about 40% of households, a little under half. Today, and in 1960, during the beginning of the women's liberation movement, it was only about 10%. So it's gone up by a factor of 4 in the past 50 or 60 years. So most parents are working, is the conclusion from this slide. About 97% had at least one employed parent, and 63% had both parents employed. So about 2/3 of children growing up today have both of their parents working full time. We could have a discussion on why that is. I think there's a ton of different factors, some good, some bad, a lot of it related to the economy and living in a post-industrial society. Okay, we're going to talk now about parental leave and the policy we have in America. So the United States has one of the lowest, oh, my face got really dark, weird. One of the lowest levels of parental leave policy. So all we really have right now that's on the national level is FMLA, which stands for the Family Medical Leave Act. So this only applies to workers who work more than 1,250 hours, which is working about 25 hours a week for 50 weeks of the year. In a company with more than 50 employees. So this means any part-time worker and also any worker in a small business is no longer able to or can't take FMLA. Now there are differences in different states. Some states do offer some paid parental leave. So California, for example, is one that does, but on a national level, there is only FMLA that grants you 12 weeks of unpaid leave. So you take FMLA, it means that your company cannot fire you and they cannot discriminate against you for taking an FMLA, but you don't get paid during that time. There are like supplemental disability insurances. So when my wife took time off after our son was born, she used Aflac actually as a short-term medical disability, since pregnancy is and childbirth is, I guess, considered technically a short-term disability, which I found surprising, but I can kind of see why that is. So why is it that America has this really low level? So there's a lot of reasons, and in the discussion, you're going to go through it by watching a lovely video that's about 15 minutes long or so on it. But the two reasons that were offered in FMLA was first devised, which was in 1993. That was when Bill Clinton was president. I think that was his second year in office. So there are two reasons. There's this fear that the costs for businesses would decrease the number of employees hired. So they thought that this would lead to higher levels of unemployment, both for men and for women. And that because of this, that would make an increased amount of money it takes to make things that make us less competitive in the world market. However, research found that that is just not the case. And in fact, most developed nations offer some form of paid maternal or parental, so mother or father, leave. And a lot of research has found there's no negative economic impact on companies or on the nations in general for it. So later on, we're going to check out a Harvard Review of Psychiatry that goes into that a little bit more, talking about some of the research on it. Okay, there's also a lot of research that we're going to check out on the Harvard Review that shows that maternal leave is associated with many benefits, both for the mom and for the child. So rather than just reading these slides to you, since I am going to post the slides, I'm going to hop over to the article. So this article is from the Harvard Review of Psychiatry. I'm going to make myself disappear for a second. Okay, It's called The Impact of Paid Maternity Leave on the Mental and Physical Health of Mothers and Children, our Literature Review and Policy Implications. So it goes through and reviews a lot of the research that has been done on this. As you can see through this 6 pages of tables, there's been a lot of studies that look at it. Okay. So one of the first things they looked at was breastfeeding and found that paid maternity leave was related to higher levels of breastfeeding. In fact, it doubled the likelihood of breastfeeding in parents. There's more over here on that as well. And then there's also a lot of good physical benefits. So researchers found that women who took paid leave of any duration had a 51% lower chance of being rehospitalized in the year after birth. They're also almost 2 times as likely to have more success managing stress or engaging in regular exercise. So there's a lot of benefits for the mom's health as well as for the infant's health. There's a decrease in infant and child mortality, which is a huge thing, as well as an increased amount of getting the recommended immunizations, increased in compliance with going to pediatrician visits. Whenever you have a kid, there's tons of well baby checkups that you go to that can catch problems really early on before they become bigger problems. And paid maternity leave allows it to be easier for parents to do that. Economically, there's a lot of studies that they review that talk about what the effect is. But one thing I'll highlight here is that when California had their state-mandated paid parental leave program, they found that almost 90%, so the overwhelming majority of small business owners, said that the program had either a positive effect or no effect on the profitability of their business. So the conclusion this paper comes is actually that that the United States is facing a clear, evidence-based mandate to create a national paid maternity leave policy. I'll highlight that right here. All right, so let's go back to lecture slides. Okay, so there's a lot of benefits for moms, for parents, and there are not any negative ramifications or repercussions for businesses. So lots of good reasons to engage in some kind of program like this. Excuse me. And now we're going to switch and start talking about childcare. So with more and more parents working, more and more parents are seeking to find ways to have their kid cared for. So there's a lot of different ways that can come. So there's relative care, which is, I think, the most common one. That's when a father or a grandparent or somebody else looks for the child. So my wife's coworker has her mom who's looking, or my wife's coworker's mom watches her child a lot of the time. There's also family daycares. So that's when it's not your own family, but it's in another person's home and they have a family daycare. There's also center daycare, and that can go through, that can also be called early childhood education. It can go all the way through preschool. And then for older kids, there are after school programs. And then for adolescents, there's self-care, which is just when the child watches themselves. A lot of the Gen X people who may or may not be your parents, depending on how old your parents are, were the so-called latchkey generation, the parents or the kids whose parents left them at home to do their own thing. As I said, the most common one is that kids under the age of 5 are cared for by parents, followed by a family daycare, and only about 1 in 5 kids are in center daycare. And that'll be important because we talk about differences in the kind of childcare that a child gets and how that can influence their development. The thing is that daycare is expensive. My son's daycare costs a few $100s more than my mortgage does. And that is true across the board, and it's actually cheaper in Michigan. This is higher than what my cost is, but it still can be almost the same as in-state tuition, which is remarkably expensive. So there was a huge study conducted, the national, it's called the NICHD, and it looked at the relationship between daycare and child outcomes. So there are 2 different perspectives on it. One of the perspectives was the idea that providing childcare could be a great way of boosting kids' social and their emotional and their cognitive skills because you have professional caregivers who are there to help educate the kids and help them grow. The other perspective was that having lots of kids in childcare could have a negative impact because it could adversely affect attachment and could adversely affect the parent-child relationship, especially when it's early on. So the main conclusions from the study, and we're going to jump into it in a second, are that parenting matters much more than childcare, and that's true both for the quantity and the quality of childcare. So exclusive maternal childcare is not related to better or worse outcomes for children. That means that kids who have stay-at-home moms don't necessarily have better or worse outcomes than kids who go to some kind of childcare arrangement. So parents shouldn't feel guilty or feel bad if they decide to work. On a personal note, I know my wife struggled with a lot of guilt when she was going back to work because our son was in daycare. And even for myself as well, whenever I drop my son off at daycare, I'd often feel kind of guilty and feel bad, like, oh man, is this the right thing? But the research shows that it is definitely not harmful for kids to be in daycare for a long period of time. However, here is just one of the tables from that study. Obviously, you cannot see what is on here. I think I can barely read it and it's right in front of me. But I do want to hop over to this study just to go into it a little bit more. This is the study that your book cites when they talk about the effects of daycare. I just wanted to go into it in a little more depth in case you're interested. So again, right here, this is showing that no evidence emerged suggested that child outcomes related to routine non-maternal care. So it's the idea of exclusive maternal care versus non-maternal care, that it doesn't make a difference in it. What they do find is that parenting matters a lot more. So they found that parenting showed moderate to large effect sizes. That means that it's a big or important effect, not just a statistically significant effect. So children who have responsive and stimulating care from their parents have higher scores on cognitive, language, social, emotional, and peer outcomes at all ages. And so they measured this at, I think, 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, and 54 months. They measured it half a year, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and 5 years down the road. And this study is actually about 10 years old. There are studies now that are looking at the effects of it in adolescents all the way up to kids around age 15. So this study is a huge study. There have been dozens, if not more, articles that have looked and examined the data they have in it. It's actually a really complicated data set. So what I want to show is that it's not quite as simple as just saying being in childcare doesn't have any effects on it, or it's no difference, because there are factors including the quality of childcare as well as the location of childcare, whether it is in a family or in a center. What they found was that higher quality of childcare, we're talking about what that is near the end, was related to small, so modest measures of higher cognitive measures, some social outcomes, peer outcomes, but these were fairly small effects. So you can see here there's a correlation of 0.11. If you don't know, a correlation can go from -1 to +1. The size of it, the absolute value, whether it's 0, 0.1, 0.2, shows you how big of an effect it is. And a correlation of 0.1 is really small. It means that 1% of the variance in outcomes can be attributed to this correlation. For a comparison, the correlation between attendance to this class last semester and having a 4.0 was something like 0.7 or 0.67. So this is a correlation of 0.1 versus the attendance one, which is a correlation of almost 0.7. That's that giant table that I posted for you. Man, I feel so bad for whomever had to make this table. If you've ever made a table before, it is a huge pain. I can't imagine this must have taken, days and hours to do, especially 10 years ago. So I don't want to belabor the point, because there's a lot of different things we can get in here. So just looking at the number of hours that they experience, or that a kid is in daycare, finding that there is research that shows that the more hours a kid is in daycare, the more problem behaviors they have at either 2 years or 3 years old. And these are moderate effect sizes, all the way up to 5 years old. So you see that there's a positive effect for language and cognition, but there can be a negative effect for problem behaviors, which is an interesting finding. I don't know what the research shows on why that is. It'd be an interesting thing to kind of find out. And then the last thing I'll get to, again, that even though there's no difference between overall maternal care or child care, there is, some higher problem behaviors as rated by the teacher, but that going into a center was related to both stronger cognitive skills and more behavior problems. So center cares are usually seen as being higher quality, but they aren't. That's not the whole story of it. So I recognize this is kind of complicated. I don't expect you to fully just understand and immerse yourself in the findings. Just want to show that there's a lot of nuance to it, and that it's not a simple doesn't matter or it's really bad for the kids. But there's a lot of complexities to it. How often are they in daycare? How many hours a week are they there? What kind of daycare they're going to? What is the quality of the daycare? What are the parents like? There's a lot of factors that can influence the findings that you get. Okay. So popping over. So how is it that you can identify a high quality child care? What I'm going to do is show you to a website. So these are just a few things on it. So in general, we found center care was associated with higher outcomes, but as I just talked about, that's not entirely true. But, excuse me, one thing to look for is sensitive and responsive caregiving. So when I took my son to daycare and we were interviewing different daycares, we asked the director, what is a question that we should ask that we're not asking? And she thought about it and said, you should look and see how many adults are on the floor with kids, because that shows that they are engaged and working with the kids. If an adult is just sitting in a chair, somewhere else not interacting with them, that's not a good sign. You want to have the adults working with the kids. You also want to know about the adult to child ratio. And a great website that you can go to, I also have pulled up here, if I can find it. No, I do not want to take a survey. Is from childaware.org. It had a previous name on it. They have a ton of information, even about the current coronavirus. If you go to families and then choosing quality childcare, then selecting a childcare program, this will take you to this page right here. Give the recommendation for it. And as a hint for the quiz questions or the attendance questions, I will have one of the questions on here about this. It's going to be a fairly simple question, but just as a way to make sure that people are actually watching the video and not just looking at the slides and trying to find the answers of it. So they offer a lot of resources talking about making sure you schedule a tour, make sure you have enough time for it. You can actually see the room where your kid's going to be. You can meet the caregivers who will be working with your children or your child. You're able to talk to the owner or director about it. And they also give this gigantic childcare checklist that you can go through. Excuse me. Has all the different questions you could ask about it. The things that you may not think about, so like whether kids are fed on demand. So under 6 months of age, the recommendation is to feed an infant whenever they get hungry. But some people try to do schedules and say they don't feed them except for every 2 hours or every 2.5 hours. So is it on demand? How do they store breast milk? Tons of different things to go through on it. So I'm going to go back to here. I'm actually going to end there on just talking about high quality childcare. I will say is that mothers and fathers spend more time now, or at least in 2000, it hasn't changed since then, than they did in 1965, despite there's increasing hours in paid employment. So a lot of parents where they don't spend enough time with their children, and I totally get why. When my son comes home from daycare, he's with us for like 2 hours of the day before he goes to bed. But parents are spending more quality time with their kids than they did in the 60s when it was just, you're in the same room, but you're not really interacting very much of it. So even though a lot of parents have a lot of guilt about not spending enough time with their kids, research shows that parents nowadays, even compared to a stay-at-home mom in the 1960s, spend more time and spend more quality time with their kids than they did 40 years ago. So with that said, I wish you all the best. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. Tried to make it a little more interesting than just talking and reading through the slides, and show you some of the actual research that backs up the findings on it, and also show you that really important website that you can go to find out more about different kinds of childcare, and what the best one for you might be. So, anyway, take care, and I guess I will see you later. Bye.